Welcome to This Just In, the show bringing you the latest advancements in healthcare, strategy, innovation, and public policy. And now, for the fastest voice in healthcare, here's your host, Justin Barnes.
Thank you for tuning in, and welcome to This Just In. I'm your host, Justin Barnes. In these segments, I'll bring you the latest advancements in healthcare, strategy, innovation, and public policy. As always, we're broadcasting from the This Just In studios on the Business Radio X network, as well as the Healthcare Now radio network. Before we begin with our special guest today, I'm very excited to announce that we'll be broadcasting the This Just In radio show again live from the HIMSS annual conference show floor on Tuesday, March 10th from 1 p.m. Eastern to 5 p.m. Eastern. This will be our 6th year broadcasting live from the conference, and I could not be more excited. And many thanks to my radio show supporters, HIMSS, Lenovo Health, Intel, Business Radio X, and certainly Healthcare Now Radio. If you're planning on attending HIMSS, we'll be broadcasting from booth 2521, very centrally located near the main hall entrance, so please stop by if you're in Orlando and see the show. If you've not been able to make the conference this year, you'll be able to stream our radio show again live at thisjustinradio.com between 1 p.m. and 5 p.m. Eastern. Last year, we had over 30,000 listeners, and it was a ton of fun and a lot of learning. We'll have another great slate of CEO, CIO, leading care providers, industry thought leaders, riveting authors, and certainly policymakers joining the show. Here are just a few confirmed guests. John Halamka from Mayo and Paul Cerrato, an author. Rasu Suresha from Atrium, Neil Gomes from Thomas Jefferson University and Penn Health, Anish Chopra, former US CTO and from Care Journey, Karen DeSalvo from Google, Dr. Don Rucker from the ONC, National Coordinator, Steve Posnack, Deputy National Coordinator, Elise Sweeney-Anthony, and Catherine Marchesini. So a great list of speakers, and could not be more excited. And we have even many more thought leaders joining the show for the second hour. And we hope you can all join us in some capacity. But without further ado, for this episode, my 193rd episode, we are very fortunate to have back two healthcare pioneers and leading authors, Dr. John Halamka and Paul Cerrato. Welcome back to the show, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And so before we dive back into your new book, Reinventing Clinical Decision Support, and this is your 4th book together, but before we dive in, John, explain your new role as president of Mayo Clinic Platform. Obviously, a lot of industry discussion around this. People could not be more excited for you, but tell us about it.
Well, sure. I guess the first question is, what's a platform? And let me state it this way. Do you know, see, Justin, well, you're not quite old enough to remember, but in the day, when we had rooms to rent, we would march down to our local newspaper, and we would place a want ad, and it would be a one-off ad hoc process, and maybe 100 people would see it. It was expensive and slow. Well, today there's this thing called Airbnb. And millions of people with little effort and little cost can list rooms for rent, and renters can look at them by millions. It's an extraordinarily efficient way to connect a producer of a good with a consumer of a good. And of course, that connector doesn't necessarily even own the good, right? It's just it's a platform that connects the two. So what Mayo said was, we have all these folks creating machine learning algorithms and novel tools and data analytics and mobile devices, but every time you try to introduce them into healthcare, it feels like you've never done it before. It's back to that little newspaper office in the want ad. It can take 18 months of just going through legal and compliance to get the agreement signed.
Yes.
And so could you create a stack of technologies, APIs to get and put data? Could you create a set of policies and template agreements, a support staff of people to make it happen, and standard processes to make these things happen with agility, so that suddenly you can do collaboration and partnership in weeks, not months to years? And so I've been charged with launching 3 lines of digital business, one around data analytics, one around bringing acute care services to the home, and one about taking diagnostic data from wearables and home-based devices and bringing wisdom and action to it.
Love it. So is that also, will you be publishing a blueprint in some ways for other people to do that as well, so we can, as an industry, can learn from that and that collaboration that you're doing?
So the interesting thing about Mayo Clinic, and I've been in this industry for 40 years. Yes, I started in healthcare when I was 17, honest.
Exactly.
I've never seen an organization as so devoted to the patient. Mm. And so what Mayo believes is the patient always comes first, and everything we do will be published, discussed, made available, and shared outside the Mayo system. So the hope is this platform would be useful throughout the world and not just in Rochester, Jacksonville, and Scottsdale.
That's fantastic. And you kind of feed it here, but tell us about the vision to transition from some of its care from brick and mortar facilities to virtual care at home.
Well, as Paul has mentioned in his comments, we're getting to the point where the tech is no longer an issue, right? I mean, it's sort of a strange story, but at Unity Farm Sanctuary, there are 103 internet-connected devices providing me telemetry on 250 animals, and I can adjust lights and locks and temperature. But yet we don't do that for patients.
Right.
You know, wait a minute. So if the tech is good enough, we have a lot of fear. You know, fear of change, risk, and a business model that could disrupt what I'll call fee-for-service heads and beds medicine.
Yes.
And so now is the time. And so Mayo is willing to make the investment to test out new care models of bringing acute care to the home with advanced technology, even recognizing that the business model isn't quite perfect yet. About a couple of years from now, we hope it will be.
Right. Love it. Congratulations. We as an industry are so excited to see this and look forward to seeing what you implement and then obviously what we can learn and glean from that. So thank you, John. That's great. So why is Mayo one of the best places to realize this transition?
So Mayo has a almost 150-year transition of being willing to experiment. It has a culture that's willing to constantly innovate and try things. It has the resources to make it happen, and it has a reputation such that it seems like a great collaborator, and so many in industry will come to help the effort. So I think it's a combination of technology, policy, and culture that makes it the one place that might be able to pull some of this stuff off.
And the one place that could pull you to do it, because you can probably pick what you want to do. So.
Yeah, but so Justin, imagine I'm going to give you the following job description. Must be an MD engineer with 30 years of digital transformation experience, international travel, speaking, and writing ability, and we're going to give you the resources to change healthcare in the world.
Amen.
Go.
I love it. I know. When I first heard it, I smiled from ear to ear. I said, this could not be a more perfect post for a more perfect person. So it's excellent. So. Diving over into this book, and I've had a chance to read it, and thank you very much, Paul, for sending it to me. Reinventing Clinical Decision Support, and I do like the Jean-Luc Picard. So before we dive into the book, where did that come from? Your initial lead in there with Jean-Luc Picard's quote.
Well, John and I are both big fans of Star Trek, and some of the moral stories that you get, especially in Next Generation, are very inspiring. And there's actually an episode in which one of the characters, a young ensign, decides that he's going to lie to the captain about something that killed one of his classmates. So Picard takes him aside and says, basically what the dedication says. If you're going to be a member of Star Trek or Starfleet, you have to be serious about telling the truth, regardless if it's a personal truth, historic truth, scientific truth, any truth. So what we did basically was take the word out of the quote that talked about a Starfleet officer and added in writer because it applies. I mean, if we're serious about finding the truth and relieving patients' misery, we have to tell the truth, whether it's pleasant or not. And that's one of the reasons why we're enthusiastic, we're optimistic about AI and machine learning, but we're not naive. This is evidence-based optimism.
Right.
And because of that, we see the need to talk about the downside of these technologies.
Yeah, I could not agree more. And so that's a great lead into my next question, really the first question focused on the book. Are AI and ML overhyped? And what are some of the criticisms, obstacles, and limitations of artificial intelligence and machine learning in healthcare?
Yeah, it is very much overhyped, and there are some vendors now getting into the field who realize that they can make a quick buck by putting something out that has very little value in terms of improving patient care. Some of the research is retrospective as opposed to prospective, and the best studies really have to look forward rather than look back. We need more randomized controlled trials. Another issue, and I think John brought this up earlier, is some of the data sets are not all that robust. They may be small. They may only be tested. The data sets may only be tested in limited environments, one hospital as opposed to 2 or 3 hospitals. And then the other issues, biases. Some of the data sets may not include patients who are African American or who are gay or women. There's a long list of ways to screw up a data set. So all of these issues have to be addressed, and they're not always addressed.
That's excellent. John?
Ryan, let me give you another quick example of how it could be overrated. So, Justin, do you realize when you woke up this morning, your white count was 5, but tonight at 2 in the morning, your white count will be 13? Well, wait a minute. No one in medical school ever said that the white count varies by circadian rhythm. Well, ask yourself this question. How many people get their blood drawn at 2 in the morning? Oh, that would be sick people.
Right.
So machine learning will make a conclusion, not understanding that the data underlying white counts in hospital labs is completely unevenly distributed. Yeah. We have to be very careful about the questions we ask of the data.
Yeah, and even at a simple level, for a living like me, the white coat syndrome. My blood pressure would always go up when I went to the doctor's office, but it was not as high when I was at home. So it's just even
that's a good example. That's a good example.
Yep. And for those just tuning in, we're speaking with authors Paul Cerrato and Dr. John Halamka about their new book, Reinventing Clinical Decision Support. So, gentlemen, discuss the black box problem in AI, how it affects clinicians' view of these tools and how it's being solved.
Yeah, to me, this is one of the most important issues. So the black box problem is basically clinicians don't understand how the technology works for machine learning because the data science is so complicated and the mathematical equations are so bizarre that for the average doc or nurse, it's easy to say, well, this is probably not the real deal. So the way that you address that is, well, education for one. I'll give you a good example of how great a need this is. Last year, John invited me to speak at Harvard Medical School. I spoke to a small group, a select group of about 30 executives and physicians from around the world. And I showed them a clip from a PBS show that explained how neural networks work. Really basic, as simple as possible. And afterwards, I had people coming up to me. Can you give me a link? Can you share your slides? When you think about this, these are some of the smartest people in healthcare in the world, and yet they found it valuable to learn more from a simple PBS program. So clearly, there's a thirst, there's a need for this, and this is one of the ways that the black box problem is going to be solved.
I agree. You want to add to that, John?
I think what clinicians are looking for is a result, right? Because the EHR has created such a burden. They're looking for any technique that is going to enable them to spend more time with patients and to go home at night thinking they have done what needed to be done. So in my discussion with clinicians, they say, boy, if you give me a black box and that black box is a community standard of care, that's okay with me.
Yep. Yeah, and that actually came out in my last, the previous think tank that I had, Think Tank 5, where I was actually, I didn't think that what you just said was true, John, but then when I had several care providers get up there that are starting to use artificial intelligence and machine learning in their care that they provide, they actually were comfortable with it. And I was thinking that they would not necessarily, because you have a lot of the philosophy that we've heard through the years, if it's not done by me, it's not right. I do it, and it's right if I do it. But they were not doing it all. They're allowing the technology to augment their care, and they still believed in it, and that was encouraging. Do you have any thoughts there?
encouraging. Yeah, I'm beginning to see in my conversations with physicians and other experts that slowly but surely they're coming around. And not only are individual clinicians coming around, but federal agencies are starting to see the importance of explainability. I was just talking to one doc who put out that the CMS, the Medicare folks, recently launched a competition asking vendors and other experts if they can come up with an AI solution to reduce hospital readmissions. And besides submitting their platform, they also had to provide explanations as to how these things work. So this is reaching the highest levels of federal government. They see the need for explainability.
That's excellent. Excellent. So how are clinical decision support vendors looking to the future in reinventing themselves?
I want to start with that is so that I know that traditional vendors of what we'll call rules and static articles are looking at ways that they can use emerging standards like the FHIR CDS hooks standard to offer more real-time customized advice in the context of workflow. And this is the really critical thing. Having the world's best AI that sits in an app outside of your workflow is unlikely to get used. It really has to be in front of you at the point of care, at the point of decision making and action. So FHIR CDS hooks is probably going to be the new sliced bread we'll see at HIMSS.
Love it. That's exciting. Any thoughts you want to add on there, Paul?
Yeah. One of the things we did for the book is we interviewed several of the vendors who are doing, really at the cutting edge of clinical decision support. And we don't have any financial interest in any of these groups, but folks like the people who put out Up to Date and Clinical Key and Dynamed Plus, Visual DX, and some of the things that they're doing. As an example, Up to Date now has a pathways approach. It's called Up to Date Advanced. And it's not a static database. It's not just based on rules, but it's uses machine learning and AI to help individualize care. So the physician can plug in, a set of specifics for each patient and go down a pathway to find out the best route to take. So the vendors are getting it, and they see the need. Either you move in the right direction or you die. And several of the vendors that we mentioned in the book are moving in the right direction.
That's great. Terrific. So, Paul, you devote a chapter to reengineering data analytics. And in one of your HIMSS lectures, you predict that big data will radically transform CDS. How is this going to happen?
Okay, this is one of the things I'm really passionate about. The title of the book has a subtitle. So it's Reinventing Clinical Decision Support, Data Analytics, AI, and Diagnostic Reasoning. And I put data analytics at the top because of the promise that it holds. It's hard to explain this without pictures, which is what I'm going to be doing in the lecture. But essentially, what's going on is you look at the very foundation upon which these systems are based, and they're mostly based on randomized controlled trials, clinical guidelines from national medical associations. And while that knowledge base is valuable, we contend that it's also flawed. And the reason it's flawed is because when you take a large clinical trial and it comes to a conclusion that, let's say, a particular diet and exercise program is of no value in patients with diabetes. It doesn't help reduce cardiovascular disease, which is one of the studies we talked about in the presentation. So it came to that conclusion. So you plug that into a clinical decision support system, and docs say, okay, well, I'm not going to bother offering any advice about intensive lifestyle. So along comes another group of researchers about 10, 15 years later, and they look at the same 5,000 patients and they say, maybe there are some subgroups within these 5,000 patients that actually benefited. So they used an MI system called random forest analysis, and they looked at 84 different subgroups and created 1,000 different decision trees, something that, it's almost impossible for humans to do, but for computers it's pretty easy. And when they did that reanalysis, they found that 85% of the population actually benefited from the intensive lifestyle program. But 15% of them not only didn't benefit, but they did worse. And when you combine the 85% with the 15%, they cancel one another out. So the original study was misleading because it didn't do a deep enough dive. So clearly, machine learning has a role in data analytics, and we go into like 3 or 4 different case studies that bring out the same point.
And this is one of the things Mayo is working on with inference. So it announced at JP Morgan this collaboration with a natural language processing machine learning firm that looks at the world's literature every day and then combines that with clinical data. So to Paul's point, let's just make up something sort of silly, Paul. You talked about how we all lie about how much we drink. Not that you and I drink or anything, but but if you would look at the study, it says, for a male of our age, 2 drinks a day is fine. And then there's a study that says, no, 3 drinks is better. And there's another one that says, no drinks is best.
Right.
And how do you take what are literally hundreds of conflicting studies and then ask, well, for the patient in front of you, how much should they drink? Because the answer is, all of the statements are probably true for the right subset.
Yeah, exactly.
And so, if you are both Paul and I are relatively thin and we're relatively healthy and we don't have a whole lot of medications, well, maybe 2 is the right number. But for others, it will be 0 or 3.
Right. No, that's fascinating. And that's something as a consumer, that's an issue just for me or something that I think about because there's, is coffee good for you? It's great for you. It's not good for you. There's so many things out there. Alcohol, good for you, not good for you. Wine, good for you, not good for you. And so I'd love to see some consolidation. And I agree that I think this consolidation is going to come from where, this book is going and where your wisdom is sharing. It's around, well, hey, there's variables. And the answer is, it's in this mixture of 185 points or 420 points that a machine can calculate and then spit out your specific, what's good for you, your result. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's the future. That is the future.
Yeah. Excellent. So real quickly, got about 2.5 minutes or so. You devote an entire chapter to systems biology, which is very interesting because I have not seen this before. What's explain that field real quickly and why is that important to improving patient care?
Okay, so most healthcare research takes what's called a reductionistic approach to figuring out what causes disease. So it's essentially a divide and conquer, and you look at smaller and smaller and smaller units until eventually you come to the conclusion that there's one specific cause to a disease. And that's really not what nature is about. So for instance, you look at AIDS and you come to the conclusion that HIV is the cause of the disease. Well, yeah, it's the main cause, but there are probably 3 or 4 or 5 or 10 other contributing causes. So systems biology looks at the whole picture and the whole person so that they can find all these other contributing causes. It's a lot like what's going on in precision medicine. You want to look at all the various contributing factors and then come up with interventions at the individual patient level to address all of those approaches. So obviously there's a lot that has to be said about the subject, but we can't squeeze it all into 2 minutes, but that's essentially it.
And as Paul gets to, the systems biology looks at all the multiple interactions that might take place. Because if you try to isolate a model and say, we're going to look at just this one system, well, that's not good because you might optimize one system while minimizing another. You need to look at the whole patient.
No, that's fantastic. So, gentlemen, we are basically at time. I truly appreciate you both. And for the sake of my audience and everybody listening, Please check out their new book that's now officially launched, Reinventing Clinical Decision Support. You guys will be at HIMSS annual conference. You will be doing a book signing. Is that the entire time? Or when's your book signing? Do you have that on hand, Paul or John?
That is Wednesday morning at, I think it's around 11 o'clock, if I remember, 10 or 11.
But certainly,
I think it's at 10 o'clock. That's my recollection.
10 o'clock, okay.
Excellent. And certainly check out John and Paul's numerous speaking engagements at HIMSS. And certainly, again, they'll be on the radio show Tuesday, March 10th at 1:30 p.m. specifically. They'll be joining the This Just In Radio show, booth 2521, but also thisjustinradio.com. So, gentlemen, again, thank you very much for joining me today and taking time out of your very busy schedules.
Always a pleasure.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, John.
Thank you.
And thank you to everyone for listening. And please tune in weekdays at 2:30 p.m. Eastern, 11:30 a.m. Pacific. As always, you can track me on Twitter at HIT Advisor and use the hashtag ThisJustinRadio so we can respond to your comments from the show. If you miss any of this episode or want to hear more, all my shows are posted at iTunes, SoundCloud, iHeartRadio, Spreaker, Google Play, and TuneIn. Also, check out the website that we launched at justinbarnes.com. Thanks, everyone. Have a terrific week, and I hope to see you at HIMSS Annual Conference.